Welcome to Fabled42, where we foster community through friendship, gaming, and chaos. Lots of folks are missing gaming, which means many of you are considering the jump to GM or to taking your current game online. Whether you're a player who wants to try your hand at running a game and are wondering if all those stories about bards are true, a new GM who just had your first players one-shotted my BBM moment and you have questions, or you're a veteran GM who just wants to hear us tell you that you're not the only one who has spent 4 hours role-playing a rabbit being interrogated by your player chuckleheads because they thought, quote, that bunny looked super sketch. This program is for you. For those of you watching at home, this is not performance art. We have prepared canned questions, but we are here for you and we want to hear from you. Just drop your questions in the chat and Chris will make sure that we get them. Let's go ahead and start off with an opening question though, and I'd just like to take for a second for our GMs to introduce themselves. With us today, we do have Danny Oliver from Catalyst Game Labs and Rem Alternus, Daniel Fox from Andrews McMeel Universal and Zweihander, we don't have Jamal. We have Walter Stewart, creator of the Kansas City Vampire setting and manager of Tabletop Game and Hobby.
Jamal here.
Yep, that's it. Yeah, you're interrupting my flow. I gotta get through this. All right. So he's the manager of Tabletop Game and Hobby, Smart Alec, as you can see, and that happens to be my personal friendly local game store as well. So, gentlemen, would you like to take a second, just tell us a little bit about yourselves and your projects? Let's start with you, Danny Oliver.
So currently I develop Shadowrun missions for Catalyst Game Labs. That's their living campaign, of course. The one that you play when you head out to the conventions and what have you, those modules. That's a lot of fun. It's really interesting. I get to work with new writers and help them kind of develop their modules and ideas. So I like that. And also I'm involved with Rem Alternus. Rem Alternus is a fledgling started as a film production company. They're working on a cyberpunk fantasy sort of web series. The initial promo trailer just dropped a couple of weeks ago. So we'll probably put that somewhere where people can check that out. And other than that, nerd content for the masses, right?
Awesome. And Daniel Fox.
Hey everybody, I'm Daniel Fox. I'm the executive creative director of games at Andrews McMeel Publishing. I created about 2 years ago Zweihander RPG. It's a dark fantasy RPG, D100 based. It won at GenCon during 2018 Best Game and Product of the Year, and since then it's kind of skyrocketed. So now it's like I'm like a real RPG designer. I left my 16-year career as a career executive in marketing, and now I work as the creative lead for RPG development at Andrews McMeel. And you probably have seen our stuff. We do a lot of our syndicated comics, of course, DNC, Foxtrot, Farside, work with Matthew in the Oatmeal. So you've probably seen our stuff somewhere, if not in the Sunday newspaper. But more importantly, Walter, who is down here to my 7 o'clock, is the manager of my favorite local gaming store, Tabletop Game and Hobby.
You say that to all the gaming stores.
Only tabletop.
Walter, would you like to take a moment and introduce yourself now?
Yeah, I'm obviously the underachiever in the room. I manage a friendly local gaming store, Tabletop Game and Hobby, in Overland Park, Kansas, which I'm proud of, but everyone else here does way cooler stuff. But I sell the stuff that these guys make, and that's been real good. I've been managing the store for about 10 years, and I've been running games for about 25, so I at least have made a lot of mistakes, so I'm here to tell you about those so you don't have to make them.
Fantastic. And I know that many of the people watching this stream already know Chris Solo, but Chris, would you like to take a moment and introduce yourself for those who haven't?
I sure can. I would like to first say that, Walter, you have the most important job of all of us, by the way. Like, if people wouldn't find the games, they wouldn't play the games, they wouldn't interact.
That's right.
The people at the game stores, if they were all assholes, then we wouldn't go there and enjoy. So, like, you have a really important job, just so you know.
Well, you haven't been to our game store, but sure. No, you know.
I actually do hope to be there soon. We've talked about lots of cool things running a con there and all that jazz. But I am Chris Solo. I am the founder of the Fabled42 network. And what is Fabled42? Well, we are a community of content creators, gamers, DMs, GMs, artists, designers, and anybody else that you can even throw in there. We have dozens of streams every week. We are essentially a geek and sundry created by the community. That is our focus. That is what our drive is. We've been streaming, I don't even know, 14 hours a day for the past couple days. We have another show at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight with a first-time GM, GW Walker, who plays Jadobi on my pilot show on Wednesdays. Our actual main show, The Realms of Ukador, is our pilot. Actual season finale, which is super emotional, is on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, so it's very exciting for that. It's been a wild ride, but I am happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're going to start off with a question to kind of introduce you guys a little bit more fully to the people who are watching. So, question 1, and I'm going to throw it out there, and if nobody speaks, I will call on you. So those are your 2 choices. So I know that a lot of us, all of us here collectively in this virtual room, have spent plenty of time dungeoning in dragons or dragoning in dungeons, however you want to look at it. But what is your favorite non-D&D RPG and why? Okay, then Daniel Fox, take over.
Well,
See, that's how that's gonna work.
Here's what people expect. They're like, "Hey, you need to talk about Zweihander because you made that thing." But the reality is that I don't need to talk about that because I've got a new favorite RPG that just positively blew up at the Ennies last night, Morkborg, which is like a super OSR D&D derivative game, dark fantasy. In fact, Chris was talking a little bit about it before we hopped on. It's really interesting. It's published by Free League. It's super small, and I love old school D&D. But this game like really ticks off on this box for me. I think that like the nostalgia I loved is playing AD&D and D&D box set first edition. This game like just I don't know, it just kind of captured my heart in a lot of different ways. Not just because it's an amazing game and it's well illustrated and it's dark fantasy, but it just kind of has taken me back, I suppose, to when I was a kid. And I really like the fact that it's a big Zweihander in the middle of the page. So that was no. But that being said, it from a user design perspective, it's really intriguing because it's geared toward like new gamers, like for legibility and reading, which is oftentimes overlooked in games. So to me, like this is kind of like a great kind of gateway into like D&D adjacent dark fantasy games that still uses the D20. That's super slim and consumable. But I've just fallen in love with this game recently.
Oh, very cool. I want to check that out also now. Walter, let's go to you next.
Oh, definitely Vampire the Masquerade, which I've loved ever since I was a little wee baby nerd back in the heady days of 1994 or so. And I discovered that I was a little wee goth, and I discovered that there was this role-playing game out there that had Susie and the Banshee lyrics in the book, and I was like, oh, this is so stylish and cool, and my trench coat fits in. And anyway, but that all aside, I like a game. It's nice to have something set in the modern day, so I can like really, come to terms with like current issues that are going on, and something that people can really relate to. But I still also get my cool vampires and all their neat abilities and sparkles and whatnot. But anyway, Vampire the Masquerade forever. So.
Nice. Okay. And Chris Solo, what about you?
I mean, I've been a D&D guy. This is an interesting story. I'm not going to go down a tangent because we have a lot of really good questions already. But I actually took a break from tabletop for about 20 years because I went in the military, and the group I joined didn't play tabletop, so there it went. And, I found out, about 2.5 years ago that D&D was a thing, and it was more about story, and I was like, excuse me? So, like, my first time getting back into tabletop was D&D, so I absolutely fell in love with it, fell in love with 5th edition, fell in love with the flexibility with the rules for storytelling and all that jazz. But this convention, I witnessed Deadlands, which we played a couple days ago, which was awesome. And then what Daniel was just talking about, Morkborg, which we had this morning, I was like, this is amazing. Like, and even like they were talking about the rules, and I don't have it, so I'm going to buy it. But they talked about like, if something terrible happens and the world ends, you're supposed to burn your $40 book. Like, that's in the book. It says, if the world ends, you go out and you burn your book. And I was like, that's a good marketing direction. But then you have to go buy another book.
And try again.
I burned my book, and it's on YouTube, coincidentally. I set it on fire and sent it to the Morkborg people. They dared me, and I was like, all right, fine. I put my Zweihander book there on top of a shield and their book. Set it on fire, sent them the video. Then they sent me the limited edition version. I was like, awesome.
Aww.
Yeah, that's great.
Sure. Nice. Good trade up. And you got to play with fire, right? Like, this is a win-win-win.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. And Danny Oliver, what about you?
So I really like Shadowrun. I'm involved in it a lot, but I have to say Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I started with the Red Box when I was 9 in the '80s, um, and jumped right into DMing because nobody my age knew what Dungeons and Dragons was, and so yeah, that's just. I also had a break. I'm a military guy as well. I had a big long break, and then I discovered persistent communities on of Neverwinter Nights. They released that in like 2002. And there was
Yeah.
like some persistent server
Yeah.
stuff with and you just weren't blocked by the by sitting at a table. You could actually get in and like role play your characters like completely, um and that was huge. And in the past about 7 years or so, I've come back to tabletop role playing and still playing Dungeons and Dragons. Still love it.
So, just out of curiosity, which edition of those of D&D is your favorite then of all of them?
I'm gonna go with fifth, and I'm gonna go with fifth because it's open the floodgates for everybody.
Yeah.
It's really new user friendly, and you know I want to knock every single gatekeeper down and push them out of the way so that all the new players can just come on through.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and I think that's an important sentiment, right? The whole idea that we tend to get this idea that this is our community, right? I think when you have something you love, you get this very possessive thing about it. But I love the fact that gaming is really an open one. We just have to remember that, like you said, right? We can't, just because we are happy here doesn't mean that we get to go, oh no, you can't come in because you don't fit with what we want to do.
Right.
So, dovetailing off that, then actually, I'm gonna skip the question I was gonna go to and say, so what have you found is the biggest challenge to the current gaming environment with respect to both the I guess the political atmosphere, but then also just things like technology and everything else? What has been the biggest obstacle in the last 6 months? And I know that the answer is going to probably just be COVID, but could we be more specific than that about what you think has gotten in the way of gaming as a hobby? Walter?
Sure. Well, no, as I've been sitting there, actually, I mean, what I'm happiest about now, I mean, aside from the COVID, obviously, is this is the best time for people getting in. Like, there are less barriers to people getting in to like role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons and all of these things than there has ever been. I mean, the sheer volume of resources on the internet, all of the cool people streaming stuff and like showing people how to play games and just making it like this, hey, look, this is all it is, and people can do the thing and watch us play and see what it's all about. It's been incredible. Like, I mean, people that I never would have thought would be like, oh, we're trying out Dungeons and Dragons, are like wandering into the store and being like, I need more dice. So it's, I have very few complaints, again, beyond the world being on fire general problem that we're going with in 2020, about people getting into games. I mean, it's the starting products have gone up leaps and bounds in terms of accessibility, the amount of people just exposing folks to it, and just in general, with a few exceptions, the acceptance that the community has had to be like, yeah, come, we'll teach you how to play a game, and we're gonna get our nerd on, and it's for everybody. So I have been real impressed by the community for almost everything. So.
Oh, very cool. What about you, Danny Oliver?
Well, I mean, the last several months, it's fairly obvious what the challenges have been, and it's been good for creating more online content. I mean, with Realm Alternus, literally that is the catalyst for us moving into this live stream gaming space, for that. The challenges that I see in the gaming industry really do kind of dovetail into how open it's getting, and there's and as we get more and more people into the hobby, diversity becomes a question that a lot of people are kind of struggling with. You know, like Dungeons and Dragons, they just announced that they're gonna do away with alignments for certain races and stuff, and then everyone's got a question about, is that necessary or what have you. But the point is that that's something we're gonna just kind of keep seeing, and we definitely, old gamers have to keep an open mind.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think to hear too, because that's what we tend to hear just in general. Like when we listen to our audiences online, one of the design goals with Zweihander was to make it as inclusive as possible, but you always run up against the tension of, well, how inclusive can a game that's about dark fantasy be? And the answer is it can be very inclusive, providing you give guidelines and tools to help people understand how to use those things as part of storytelling, as opposed to as a point of abuse. So I think that that's definitely I think the key insight is that we're seeing younger gamers come in through the lens of actual play. So people like Chris, who's below me, who's creating amazing content and all the way laddering up to like Critical Role. We're seeing a lot of younger gamers enter the industry through the lens of actual play. So younger gamers have different demands than older gamers. So we as publishers not only need to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do culturally, but we also need to be nimble and be willing to change the way that we do things to ensure that we're meeting audience demands. And I think the thing that Danny mentioned, which is how do we be inclusive? This is this is like the big bugbear in the room. A lot of well-established publishers have primarily white, bearded male writers, and that's just a fact of the matter. And it's not a bad thing, but it's not a good thing either. I think more so than anything else, I think people like myself, I try to use my point of privilege as an opportunity to bring in more marginalized BIPOC and POC writers. One of the things I established very early on at Andrews McNeil Publishing was for me to be a force for good, to use that point of privilege to actually bring in not just white bearded guys to write games, because there's plenty of those people in the industry doing that. So I think really the challenge is not necessarily for publishers, but it's more so geared toward like how, as an author or creator or writer or game master, how do you get recognized by publishers to bring you on to freelance and pay an equitable wage for that. And obviously this is a much bigger nut to crack, and I don't want to wax too poetically about it on this channel, but it's something that's very important to me as the creator of Zweihander and the lead of Andrews McNeil, is that we provide opportunities for marginalized creators, BIPOC creators, and that we represent people as best we possibly can in our writing.
Oh, no, I think those are all, that's a really great position to have, and it's nice to hear everybody speaking in those terms. Chris, what about you? What are the challenges that you've seen?
I mean, I come from a little different perspective. So, like, the challenges that we've been seeing is, luckily, we used to be everyone in the same room game, and then I moved. So then we started getting remote before COVID. So I got all those chaos things done before everyone else, and we found Vorpal board, which is the board that we're using now. But I think with our community as far as just ingesting content, our community as far as communicating and engaging in our shows and in our different programs that we have throughout the week, I'm gonna have to say, like, D&D Beyond is the biggest thing that has helped 5th edition 100%, especially for streams, because me as a DM, we have D&D Beyond campaign. I have all my 5 character sheets up in front of me. I can see their stuff. If they have questions about their spells, I can pull it up really quickly. And Twitch has a D&D Beyond overlay, so then the fans or people who are watching the streams can actually click those character sheets and look at them and be like, ooh, this is really cool. And then you can also see, like, the HP and all that. So as far as, like, technology, and especially in this time, is we're also realizing that a lot of people are depending on content. Like, not everyone wants to just sit and binge Netflix, because Netflix is lonely. You're at home watching Netflix with your significant other. When you're watching, unless you're watching Critical Role, because nobody can keep up with that chat. Like, that's just ridiculous. But any of the other streams that isn't going like this 1,000 miles an hour, you can engage with people, and you look forward to seeing that person that you've never met in your entire life, but you feel like you know them in the Twitch chat. And it's that cohesion of family that we're building, and that, especially in this era, I think that it's been huge. It's been really huge, and this whole GenCon thing has been pretty awesome too, trying to navigate all of this as well.
Yeah. Those are all some really great answers, but what I'd like to do now is kind of steer back a little bit to gaming proper and say, so I think that there's sort of a general consensus that there's no such thing as rules in gaming. I mean, beyond the ones that are in the giant stack of books, behind any given one of us probably. But what I mean by that is when it comes to role playing, I think there are no rules. There are guidelines and there are recommendations, but rules are kind of harder to come by. However, we also all know that we have our own rules that are sort of unspoken in our heads. So starting with you, Walter, what is your number one rule of gaming at your table?
Stay out of other people's spotlight. Is my number one. Like, everyone needs to have their chance to shine. Every character is going to have their cool moment. You try to make it so every session, it focuses a little bit on somebody, and like, this is their story, and we're dealing with their issues or their antagonists or that kind of thing. And when it's that person's time, everyone else needs to kind of step back and support that person, but not like, I gotta be up front and do the cool thing. And that nothing infuriates me more than somebody else trying to kind of horn in on like, this is their moment, dude, this is their cool thing, or their, you killed my father, prepare to die time. You need to let the, imagine if Wesley had come in and been like, you also killed my friend, prepare to die. No, that's not acceptable. He's got to have the time to do the thing. And I, it's and I'm going to put on my Jamal hat, because Jamal should have been here and is a much better game master than I ever will be. But learning from him that, you just explain that to your players, and it's usually pretty easy. We're all adults. So sit down with people and be like, hey, let them do their thing. And if you want to help them out or back them up or give them an assist, great. But step back, let them have their spotlight. So you'll get your turn.
Yeah, so for those of you who are watching at home, Jamal is another one of our colleagues here in Kansas City that does a number of these events with us. He was unable to make it this afternoon, but he is a fan favorite, and a favorite of all of us. So occasionally, Walter especially will quote Jamal.
Because he is the best, and I'm going to change my thing right now to low rent Jamal.
Do you have a what would Jamal do bracelet? That's the.
Oh yeah, I mean, they make those. They have WWJD right on them. That's what that's for, I presume.
Yeah. So Chris, what about you? What is your number one rule at the table?
I think respect is my number one rule. I mean, we usually have meetings. Because we're not scripted. Everything's improv. I don't even really prep as a DM anymore. I build the world. I build the regions. I build the cities and NPCs and anything that's in between. And whatever they want to do, they do it. And it becomes really awesome and cohesive. That's not the word. I'm tired.
Cohesive?
There we go. Been streaming too long today. But the idea is just respect, right? If the players have to respect each other, and they have to respect me, and I have to respect the players, and if that isn't there, you're gonna have issues, and the issues will fester because people won't talk about it because everyone's passive, right? Everyone will just hold on to it. Oh, it'll be fine. 3 months later, blah, and they blow up, and you're like, whoa! Like, respect, communication, respect. Like, if there's something wrong, like I have one-on-one meetings with a lot of my players after the shows. And the beautiful part, and this is my biggest suggestion for every DM out there, even if you don't stream, record your sessions. Record your sessions. Even if it's just janky, anything, record them, because you can go back and you can watch. You can watch when I did this really big thing, and Walter was like, oh, I was all into it, but then Danny felt shut down, right? And I didn't pick it up because I was so ingrained with what Walter was doing, right? So that's the whole thing. Like you keep that respect, you keep that communication, and then you can go back and check the footage. Oh wow, when I did that was really bad. I'm sorry that I disrespected you. Like, that becomes the conversation, because then you can all check the footage, check that replay. But yeah.
Danny Oliver.
Oh boy, so I'm just going to be entirely selfish with my rule, and it's basically that you have to put up with all of my really horrible accents. That is the number one rule at my gaming table.
Yeah, suck it up. All right.
Yep, that's it's fairly simple, I think. No one really has to think about anything, and we just kind of move through.
And what about you, Daniel Fox?
So above and beyond whatever game I'm always running, one of the key elements I feel about having a good, smooth session are transition points. So when do we transition between role-playing and combat, or role-playing and chase scenes, and role-playing and travel? One thing that we have done since I was a young, I'm 43, I've been playing Red Box as well forever. The thing we always did was we rolled initiative at the beginning of the game session. And we put it up on a marker board, and we only look at it when it's time to move into structured time. So we find that as opposed to kind of creating that pause break where you have like now we're moving from role play to combat. Like it eases the transition. People tend to like it a lot better because we're not like, all right, let's all get up and reset and take a bathroom break and come back. Like everyone's already like in character, so it's easier to kind of take them, to carry them by by hand in the combat, to be thinking about their character from the perspective of what their character would do, not just the tactical sticky options that games offer tabletop role players. I found it to be a very successful tool. I worked it into my own games, Zweihander. It's part of that, and it'll be a part of future games we develop too. But that rolling initiative before the game starts is a pre-game ritual, because we have pre-game rituals and post-game rituals. But the pre-game ritual of rolling initiative at the very beginning has been by far not only just the most popular rule we always use, but it's transcended the game that we play, no matter what game we play it in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. So, speaking of kind of that cool stuff, my personal rule is actually the rule of cool. That if the players want to do something, regardless of how ridiculous it is, I'm gonna give them a shot to do it, because at that point, if they came up with a cool, creative idea, we're doing it. We're gonna figure out a way to at least let them try, right? And even if they don't succeed, they're gonna fail spectacularly, right? It's gonna be memorable, no matter what, right? But speaking of kind of the rule of cool and doing fun, cool things at the table, I think all of us at one point or another have invented little events or trappings or mechanics that have found our way, as you just talked about, Daniel, into almost every game that we play, right? We invent little things. I'm going to give my example real quick just to kind of set the tone for what I'm talking about here. I have a player who consistently decided that he was going to jump into a pile of whatever awful substance it was we were walking by, whether that was mud or literal awful from like a stockyard or something like that. He would jump into the puddle and look for stuff for whatever reason. And so I decided that was a cool thing. So I developed a whole table in terms of pardon me, but jumping into shit table. And the point is, when you jump in there, depending on what it is and where it is and so forth, there's a chance that he'll actually find something useful and cool, or he'll find, a tattered doll or something like that doesn't really matter. But that's the kind of thing that's made its way now into pretty much every game I've ever run. So I'm curious what you guys have developed that is also kind of similarly, it came up at the table because one player, but then look, it's everywhere. So let's start with you, Danny Oliver.
Oh wow. I don't know that there's any particular specific thing that is then transcended wherever it began and moved into my other games. I've created a lot of stuff for the missions just because we have to set a sort of a singular table for living campaigns, so that when a player plays at one table and then moves to another table with a different GM, they can have an experience that's consistent, right? So,
Right.
we did things like set up different settings for how easy it is to get firearms in, like, say, Neo Tokyo or what have you, which is different from the normal settings, and those things we have to develop. But as far as something that just transcends and works into all systems, not really, not anything like that. No.
Oh, okay. Well, what about you, Chris Solo?
Can you remind me the question? Because I was just really listening to what he was saying.
No, no, we're just looking for the cool mechanics that you've invented, that you developed them for one particular character or one particular setting, and then but it was so cool and awesome that it kind of transcended and ended up in every game you ever run. Now there's this thing that happens.
Oh, that is a good question because I homebrew a shit ton. There's I'm much like my games are much more based on realism. So there's a lot of games with 5th edition D&D specifically where it's very clunky and railroady just out of the book. Like flanking, for example. Like that's probably the biggest one. I'll just use that so we can go on. But like I do flanking, but I do very specific flanking. So like if it's a large enemy and he's facing a direction because he's engaged with another player, as long as you hit that enemy from a different angle where it's not in his peripheral, you get flanking. You get advantage on the attack. And you can players have done things where they would attack, and then I would have them roll like they try to like, hey, look at me, they'd be all angry because like the cleric's like fuck, so then the big baddie will actually turn, which will no longer, because then also that also evolves to attacks of opportunity. So my attacks of opportunity and flanking are very specific to if one enemy is fighting another enemy, if you're standing behind him and you run away, you don't get an attack of opportunity because he's not specifically engaged with you. If you're in that cone, that peripheral range.
Okay. And Daniel Fox.
Well, I think the one that kind of transcends, I think, games for us. So every game includes Rule 0, and I think we know what Rule 0 is. It's like, if the rules don't work, just ignore them. Which, sure, but let's be honest, it's a bullshit out for bad game design. The reality is, I'm sorry, it is. The reality is,
took the lid off the swear jar there, and we're on it now. Yeah.
Truth hurts.
But I have a positive spin to share. So here's how I treat it. I am a strong believer that the game master is not the only owner of game rules around the table. We all are players, game masters, and we are all equally responsible to make house rules that work. It's not just the game master choosing a house rule and say, okay, guys, now we're going to use this rule. To me, it's like we use what we call the golden rule, which is if a rule doesn't work for our table, we'll take a note of it, and at the end of the game session, we'll discuss it, and we will come up with a house rule together. Yeah. We will find a way for all of us to find something that fits the story we want to tell, as opposed to simply ignoring the rule. I mean, granted, you ignore the rule when you're in the moment. You don't interrupt the game session. That just slows down what's happening, the action, whether it be the story or the mechanics. But I think that the impetus is really on the game master and players to jointly create rules together that work best for their table. And to me, that's what I kind of call the golden rule. That we've carried that forward from Dungeons and Dragons and Morkborg and every game I've played, including the ones I've created. I think it's just a smart way to address what can oftentimes be seen as gaps in game design, or really just kind of like the out that designers will take. It's not a bad thing by any means, but I think more so than anything else, that power dynamic between like game master, dungeon master, and players needs to change. It kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier about younger gamers. Their expectations are different. So we have to build games that make everybody, empower everyone around the table to take ownership of the rules together.
Oh, I think that's a really good point. So Walter, what about you?
It's probably less a hard and fast rule and more almost a running joke that's taken on a life of its own. But in every game, and it's just evolved into a thing, it's Ask the Bartender. And it's for when the players they're not picking up what I'm putting down or whatever intricate clues that they should get. But if for whatever reason they haven't figured them out, which is never my fault, obviously. But it's the way to like kind of fish for a clue, as it were. It's like there's always a bartender, whether it's at the tavern or the neo-cyberpunk whatever substance bar, or just an actual bar in like a vampire game. There's always going to be the grizzled person that knows everything behind the counter that can just kind of nudge them a little bit like, oh, maybe not. And they'll usually tie it to some sort of charisma or social skill roll or whatever, determine like quality of clue that I'm going to give out for it. But basically just hey, I don't think it's as clear as you think it is. Maybe we can get a hint about where the thread picks up somewhere. And that's Ask the Bartender's been in just about everything I've run. So if they have to find a bar, one will show up. So
does Jamal use that rule?
Probably. No, he probably uses the better one that's smarter than he came up with.
So now
he leaves better clues.
Yeah,
so
I was going to say, how dare you suggest Jamal needs that device, Daniel? What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to gas Walter up. Walter's a kick-ass game master.
No, he is. Walter's a delight to play with. So.
No. And I will say, going back to Daniel's earlier thing about beards, I should have shaved before this because this is not on. Everyone else here is like, look at our cool beards, and I'm. But I was not warned about this.
I don't have the cool beard, so now you're making me feel othered. So thank you.
Oh, look, it's good, and it's not. And it anyway.
No, it's fine. Okay, so another game. Well, first I want to do a quick reminder for those of you who are just joining us who didn't hear the announcement at the beginning. If you're in the audience and you want to ask a question, please, by all means, type it into the chat, and Chris Sello over there will make sure
I have
that
about
the question
15 ready for you.
Oh, then you know what? I just didn't tell. You know what? I love the sound of my own voice, but absolutely, let's hear from other people.
Sure. Let's go to. What's the most critical kind of prep you can do prior to a session of a D&D type of game?
Ooh, that's a good question. Why don't we start with you, Chris, since you're the one who just asked the question?
I guess that's it. Well,
yeah.
in the beginning, again, I'm a new DM, right? I mean, you may not know when you watch my shows, only because I watch each show like 5 times, and each show is like 3.5 hours long, and I've been doing it 2.5 years, and it's been crazy, right? Episode 99 is on Wednesday. Like, I'm losing my mind. But the biggest thing for prep, like, I used to really like, okay, if they get here, they're gonna go there, and they're gonna go there, and I used to be very stringent and very stuffy, and my games were very boring. Not boring per se, but like boring from the players. Like, I was excited, but my players weren't. So the prep is just like, it's because like my games, I view my games. It's not my game. It's not my game. It's your game. It's your story. It's my world. So like my world is prepped. I have a map of the entire world, all the continents, all the cities, all the towns. There's NPCs. It's completely filled with NPCs. So if they want to reference a town that they're from, and they're like, hey, what's the blacksmith's name there? I also have a long cheat sheet of other names, but just that's the prep. So I do all that prep, and then I don't ever have to think about it for the rest of the campaign because it's already done. So then when I'm in the game, like today's game, I'm like, okay, so this is where I think they're gonna go. These are the minis I think they're gonna need. Okay, I'm good, and it's a lot less stressful for me because I did that legwork in the beginning.
No, that's a really great recommendation. Walter, what about you?
I think the most important thing is figuring out what everybody else that's not your players in the world is sort of doing. And like the idea to make the game feel alive, to make it so you think about all these other NPCs and all these other characters, and especially all these villains, and what are they doing while your players are sort of doodling around doing whatever they're doing. And that makes the game feel alive because they'll still progress. They'll still do things independent. So if your character spends several days in the dungeon, well, Arcanok the Grim or whatever, he's not just going to sit in the bottom of his dungeon and be like, oh, I guess nobody came in today, so let's have the bridge tournament we've been trying to schedule. Like, he's going to do something, and that makes it more interesting. It makes the players feel like, oh, we have to take action because otherwise actions are going to happen to us, and it kind of keeps the initiative on, that it's like you need to make plans and do them, and if you don't, other stuff, the world's moving all the time, other things are happening, other characters and players and everything have their own hopes and dreams that they're going to try to interact with, and that makes everything feel alive instead of just that sort of video gamey, like, well, I spent 238 days mining copper and then I went into the town and everything's exactly the same as when I left. So make things outside of the character. Right.
Yeah. What about you, Daniel Fox?
I think both Chris and Walter are going to hit the nail on the head when it comes to being a good game master, dungeon master, whatever it may be. I want to take it back just a further step. There's this concept in Japan called a Motonashi, which basically translates into to anticipate and be in service of. Chris mentioned earlier that his game is for the players. I think that game masters have to be prepared, not just for the story, but also to be a good host, especially if you're hosting games, whether it be remotely, in the case of most content creators, or hosting games in person if you're running a game store out of your own home. I overstock on dice, markers, pens, paper, water, everything that I know a player is going to forget to bring or not have on hand. I always try to have an excess of, because I believe that the way to make a good game experience is to be a good host at a house, whether your game's in a basement or if it's digital. Like, there are things that we do as game masters to prepare even before the game is ready, as that methodology. And I just started reading about this whole idea about Motonashi, and I'm really I know it sounds super highbrow, but I don't mean to get super nerdy here, because we're nerds or anything. But I like the idea of, like, how do we best service not only just the game, but also service and anticipate what the players may need to be successful at having a good time. And to me, that's where I try to over-index, I suppose, when it comes to games in my house when we could still play here. Now it's just playing remote.
Yeah. And Danny Oliver?
Well, following those three, all I can say is it's going to be what pair of lucky underwear I'm wearing to game that night. Because they hit it all on the head for me. You can have maps, you can have miniatures, you can have all these things and be ready to, like, run a rail through the through the evening, and your players are going to find something. They're gonna wanna check out that bunny, the aforementioned bunny. It's just gonna happen. So yeah, just kind of knowing what's going on in your world, what's going on with all the characters, you know, and that doesn't mean you have to like hammer everything down and make sure you've built your world completely before you can run a game, but just having that knowledge of knowing like, okay, well, they can go talk to the bunny if they want. Like, that's cool. We can talk to the bunny all day. I know what's up with the bunny, so you know that I'm no sweat. You know, if they wanna, if they go off on this tangent, like don't introduce things that you're not ready for them to go off after, right? So and that's kind of what it is, just looking at everything, saying I know what's happening in this town. So eventually, they'll either get to what I kind of planned, or they'll leave the town, I guess, and then I can just run some random shit pit encounters for them.
You just described my whole life, man. That's right there.
You
buddies
said something
and shit pits,
super important. Don't introduce something that you're not ready for. I made a huge mistake when we did a second show called Ashes of Ukador, which took place 3,000 years in the future, so it was sci-fi. I built 19 solar systems with 9 planets each, and each planet had multiple cities and things. It wasn't enough. They would always want to go to a planet that wasn't ready, and I'm like, oh my god, like guys, like I can only make their ship break so many times. I can only make them be attacked by bandits so many times. I'm like, you know what? We have to put a pin in this, guys. We'll circle back later. I'm not ready for this. Like that was too much.
On that though, for everybody watching, real quick, a thing to kind of do is don't lock in what all your planets are, right? So like they haven't been to 50 planets that you have made. So there's no reason the planet that they're going to isn't just one of those planets.
Yeah, right. I made the mistake of showing them everything.
That'll do it.
Yeah,
I want to tweak just what was said there a little bit. So when I prep, the 2 most important things I do, because obviously I've already got a bunch of the encounter I already know. I know that the next step is, or what they're likely to go, or at least I have an idea of places they can go. But the 2 things I do is I make sure that I know what the consequences of the previous actions were, because if your chuckleheads are anything like mine, they did something stupid that led to, or could at least lead to, some kind of negative consequence, right? So I make sure I remember what those are so I can impose those, as well as rewards, obviously, but the consequences are way more fun. And then remembering, like figuring out ahead of time the places I think I can give each player their spotlight. So I can at least plan ahead, so I'm not, struggling at the end of the evening going, crap, I forgot about Brad. Brad needs to do something cool, right? I don't want that. So those 2 things I make sure I've got kind of in my head at least a little bit beforehand.
I think this leads into, what I think is like the most important GM rule, and so I want to get to it, is that, sure, I'm going off on my own, is that also you just can't be prepared, like you can't lock in your plot 100%, and if your players want to go somewhere else, you have to like you're saying about that, it's their game or whatever, you have to just be like, well, they want to go over here, so cool, that's what we're doing. I ran a game of Tyranny of Dragons or Horde of the Dragon Queen or whatever, and they found some dragon eggs, and they were like, we're going to raise dragons. And it's like, there's a dragon cult over here, and they're like, no, we really want to see what these baby dragons do. And it's like, cool, Adventures of Foster Dragon Parents, that's what I'm running now. And that's right, everyone had a blast, and we never really got back around to the end of the world Tiamat cult, but whatever. They were having a blast, and at the end of the day, you want to play the game that your players want to play. So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the beautiful part, is everything that you had planned for the rest of that campaign, you just put that on the shelf, and you're like, we'll come back to that with a different campaign, because we all play tabletop way too much. But some of the beautiful, like, if you watch any of our shows, a lot of the really, really beautiful moments, like, I'm always listening. And it's beautiful because they don't see when I'm writing stuff down. Like, I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I'll take that one. That's a good idea. So, like, there's so many times organically, as we're weaving through this story, that they do some crazy shit. And I'm like, that's really good. And obviously I'm like, okay. But inside I'm like, oh, yeah, do that. That's amazing. And, like, it's all these really fun things that just really, it just gets all the juices flowing, and it's amazing.
And you do that right, and then they feel like they figured it out, and they get like this big,
Yeah.
Players
do we have
are great.
Another question? Oh, do we have
Players
another
are great
question?
at driving story stuff, right? Be flexible. I think. So it's like let them actually decide the best course. Sometimes it's best just to do that. Like, don't like you mentioned before. Don't lock yourself to the story. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this with many different D&D games. Like, a lot of adventures are written to be kind of railroaded because the way they are. But let players run with these crazy zany ideas, because they are as much as in charge of the story as you are as a game master.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we do have more questions. We have so many. We only have 15 minutes. Like this is.
I know that's we can try to, but it's cool.
Where is it? Yeah, tips for helping your players feel connected to their characters and invested in the story. #backgrounds. That's a very important thing. I mean, I guess I can start since I'm still talking, and I never stop talking. That's why I made a network so people would watch me talk. No, backstories are important, right? You may not ever use any of it. I know there's a lot of DMs out there that don't want a backstory. It's totally fine. I want pages of backstory because I want to know your parents' names, your children's names, siblings, if they're alive and dead, how they die, anything that I could use to hurt you. No, anything that I could use into the story which makes you feel like you're connected to that story. Because once I get all of my 5 players' backgrounds, I'm like, oh, this one kind of connects with this one, and I'll put you guys over here, and like this one kind of connects with this one. So when they get to town, whatever, EDAC, and they're like, they meet somebody, they're like, oh wait, you know him too, and then you all of a sudden get invested into that story.
Yeah, if I could take from here, what we do a pretty extensive session 0. Obviously, a lot of people do session 0s, but we try to actually create relationships and antagonization within the group during session 0, so everyone understands what their interparty relationships are at the start. And I think with character backgrounds, like most importantly, especially if you're running a game that has stakes, players will care nothing more than they typically care about their stuff. But if they have family and people and relationships that are at risk, it's easier to kind of put them in the character mindset because now they have something more than just to lose that +1 magic sword that they got in the first dungeon they ever went to. It's about being able to use those, for good and for ill, but mostly for good storytelling, to create character relationships during session 0. Don't let players create their characters on their own. Make it an event that you have with your players where you create characters and you create bonds between them during that session 0. That's what I think will really drive intrigue and interest in really getting players into their characters.
Yeah, that's what I did for our Realms of 2 season. Well, I did it for other shows too, but I had 3 session 0s. So 2 players met organically in the world, session 0. 2 players met organically in the world, session 0. Now 1 person. Our episode 1 is when all 5 meet, and they all without any serious railroading went to the same place because they didn't know where they were supposed to go, and they all ended up in the same place. So it's not just meeting people in the tavern. So it was nice.
Yeah, that's.
Walter,
I was going to say the same thing.
Or Danny, that works too.
I
just want to make sure one of you guys got to talk.
Like a session 0, and then there's an infinite amount of numbers between 0 and 1. So session 0, 0.1, 0.2, etc. I found the first few times I was streaming as a player, I made a character, I got excited, got into play the game, and then it took a couple of sessions to get into the skin of the character, right? And so just having that before the show starts, like Chris said, he's got his show starter number 1, but he's got a few things where the players can actually play and interact with their characters, and they'll get a feel of their characters and they'll get to work those in. And then as the GM, you could also run, you could ask them, hey, what are a couple of key events in your life? And maybe you could just do a one-on-one, just run through that event. Things like that.
Yeah, very cool. Walter?
I would say what I call them is individual player NPCs, where it's try to make NPCs that sort of vibe with an individual character, because then that becomes sort of their NPC, and that really ties them in. It's they really dig the blacksmith, so that's the person that this character talks to, and that it's sort of their person, they're forming a friendship between their character and that. And each NPC isn't just this guy who talks to this unit that is the party. That there's some personal relationships, there's some one-on-one relationships between PCs and NPCs, and not just this blob that runs around in a unit and has 5 heads and talks to all the NPCs as one group. So.
Yeah, I would say too that watching your players the players will tell you what they are interested or start to care about. I know this is a common story that people hear, but I had a dungeon encounter. Well, it was sort of a dungeon encounter, and I had this guy. He didn't have a name. He was random elf guy. He had a long, cool cape with feathers, and his whole job, he had one job only. He was on screen for literally seconds. He brought some zombies in to attack the players, and he jetted. He was out. He was outies. The players took personal affront to that and chased him down. And they kept every time after every moment they had, it was, well, where is that guy? Can we go find that guy? Can we search for this dude? Right? And I was like, I don't even know. Fine. So I had to add him to the story, give him a name, give him a background, because they told me that dude, for whatever reason, was important to them. So that became, I just latched onto it and said, all right, well, if you guys care about that, if that's what you want to chase down, sure, he's now sort of a deputy to the big bad villain. All right, whatever. So I think just paying attention to your players and what you see them care about, and jumping on that when you get the chance.
Another really good question, I know we only have maybe time for one or maybe two more, is how do you deal with burnout? Player burnout, DM burnout?
What is this burnout you speak of?
Yeah, I think you're sitting here talking to a group of people who all run multiple games or do multiple game things, so we're kind of looking at you like, what? But from my perspective, I can talk about a player a little bit, because I know that with all the business with COVID, I have a player who lost a family member actually to COVID-19. And so for her, it became, she couldn't even think about this right now. So one of the things that I've done is to keep in contact with the other players at the same time. So that they kind of still feel like they're connected to the game world, and we have things going on in the background. And I would say that probably works even without the pressure of the COVID-19, that giving the players a place to talk outside of the game, so they feel like things are constantly moving forward, so there's sort of a constant energy. It's not inundating, though, because they can choose to go in and play when they want to, but they can also kind of step back when they don't. So, but giving them that place where they as players can get together and talk through things is, I think, valuable, because that lets them, again, feel just more invested in the whole process.
Yeah.
The other detail with that question, real quick, was the person who asked the question was asking about burnout, but they long multi-year campaign, 3 sessions from the end, people stopped showing up. That was the more specific part of the question.
So here's the deal. Game masters get really tied into the length of a campaign, and sometimes you just gotta hang it up. Sometimes you just gotta stop, even if you're like that close to the end. It's better for everyone's, the approach for the game master, for the players, to just sometimes you got to end a game and start again. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it does feel a bit like you may have like that kind of that ego as a game master to be like, I want to complete the story, we got to do this. And other players are just like, oh, I don't want to play this game anymore. And this is really just about back to what Laura spoke about, which is communicating with your players. Sometimes you just gotta stop. I can talk about a specific player. I won't go into too much detail, but he's like, I don't like the character I'm playing. We're literally 67 game sessions in. I'm like, okay, let's do a new character. Cool, no problem. We'll work him in. We'll find a way to make it work, because I want you to play. I want you to be invested, and we want you to come play games with us. And I think that we have to be flexible. Once again, we have to be willing to set aside our own game masters. Like, we gotta make this story work with these characters because this is what's happened so far. We just gotta let it go sometimes. There's nothing wrong with it, because trust me, the game's gonna work out regardless. And if it doesn't work, you start a new game. There's nothing wrong with that either, because there's nothing cooler than really have first level characters. That's like the best part, for me at least. But
nothing cooler than killing all your players' first level characters.
I also give that, yeah.
To attest to what Daniel's talking about, I mean, everybody idolizes Critical Role. Molly Mock didn't want to play Molly Mock anymore, and he died. It was very obvious on screen that he didn't want to play Molly Mock anymore, and he died. And now he's played his other character, and it's really awesome. Sam, same reason. Like, was that session? I don't even remember which game that was. I'm so tired. But he played a character for first part of the campaign, and kind of got tired. His story took him a different direction. He played another character for a while. So like there's lots of fun ways you can integrate that. If a player doesn't like a player, you write them off for a little while. If they need a break, they take 2 months off, and that person's going on a personal quest. Like there's a lot of things that you could do as a DM GM to just give someone that pause button and then come back.
Literally just had that happen in a campaign I'm running. Had a gentleman who was playing another character, was about to eat it. He jumped in and did the heroic save, but his character died. And then he switched out with his wife because they have kids, so they can't game at the same time. So he was gaming and she was not. So then they switched. So now she's playing a character in the campaign. And then another player wasn't feeling like her character was fitting properly, and so she switched out. And we just kind of wrote a segue out of her character and then brought a new one in, and off we go. It's just talking to your players after it was mentioned earlier, talking to your players after each session and just saying, hey, what's going on? How do you guys feel about that? What's, is there anything, just getting that gauge, getting the temperature of the room and just making sure that everyone's still invested and everyone's still having a good time, and take a break if you need to.
Yeah. Can we try to get one more question in, Chris, and then we'll
Yeah,
call
for
it?
it.
Yeah.
You want to? You have a question, or you
No,
want
no,
me
no,
to
no.
do a big
I
one?
want you to no. Pull. I
Okay.
want an audience question. Like I said, this is fine.
God, that's that. There's a deck of many things question. That's funny. I made my own deck of many things, which is worse. So it's I'll leave that alone.
Yeah.
There's so many good questions. I have to pick.
That's what killed our guy, the deck of many things.
Like many things.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I've seen that go bad.
This is a good one. This is a really good one. What are your tips for inter-party conflict? Whether in-game or around the table, how do you deal with challenging players that sometimes push a few too many buttons?
Okay, so this is the negative interparty conflict, not the good kind where
Correct.
it's like you can sit there and go, yes, this is awesome, right? But the bad kind that actually is disruptive. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Jamal hat time. Jamal hat time.
okay, well,
Yeah.
Jamal, by all means, RP
He-
Jamal.
the most important thing is again the Jamal rule that I live by is that we're all adults is the important thing, and when people aren't getting along, everyone will suggest things like you do clever GM tricks or you do all these things. No, you sit down with people as adults and you tell them to, you help them work it out. You be like, hey, what are people trying to bring to the game? What kind of experience do people want in the game? How do people want their game to go? And have those people work out, like this person wants A and this person wants B. Can they come to a place where they can both kind of get what they're looking for and have fun in the game and work out and let them know, hey, the things you're doing is making the game not fun for this person. Yeah. And ideally, if you're playing with good people and they're having fun, they'll be like, oh, yeah, let's not do that. Let's do a thing so everyone can kind of get. And that's in session 0, not just making characters, but a lot of what the game should be about is like, hey, this is what the goals for the game are. This is the style of game we're looking for. What game are you looking for? So everyone can kind of get on the same page, because most of those conflicts honestly are coming from player A wants to swing swords and kill goblins, and player B wants to talk and have sex with every NPC they can find. And those things aren't jiving because, they're stabbing all the NPCs that they want to talk to or whatever. But it's just because they both have a different game that they want to play. And if you let people talk about it and figure out, hey, this is how we're going to do it, 90% of the time it works out. And sometimes you end up with kind of
it goes back to your first point when you talked about sharing the spotlight. Like, everybody has a different play style. Some people like to sit in the tavern. Like, when it's someone's doing what they like to do, you go along with it. Like, you can check out and just be at the tavern and not be engaged in the party, which isn't fun or constructive, or you can follow along and like, okay, they go with you when you want to go murder everything. Like, you can go with them when they want to go shopping. Yeah. Those are great points. Awesome points.
And you have to be ready to make the hard call. That's an unfortunate reality too. Sometimes you're just gonna. It's only happened once for me, ever, but sometimes you just get to a point where there's just the way the players there's just at an impasse. Their play styles just aren't vibing, and they're not going to, and you just have to make a call.
Yeah, I think to Danny's point too, I mean, you can curate your game group as best you can, whether you're friends or acquaintances or friends of friends, but ultimately players won't always want the same things out of the game. Like Walter mentioned, some characters want to kill, some characters want to talk. And I think that the way that you saw them, much like how Walter said, is like you have a debrief, like talk after the game, like talk as a group, and only talk individually if you need to. Because I think that the gaming group should probably be involved in some of those conversations because it's certainly impacting other people. But if it's a serious issue, obviously it's a 2-in-1 or a 1-on-1 conversation. But at some point or another, like Danny said, you have to make the tough call. I've made many tough calls, I think, in my younger days when I didn't really do a good job of curating my game group. And we still certainly deal with inter-party conflict that can sometimes be negative and spill over outside the game. It can bleed outside of that. But I think having, adult conversations and just talking about, hey, we're trying to have fun. Let's actually get to the heart of the matter. Because at the end of the day, games are not therapy. They're therapeutic. And a game master is not your therapist. So if you've got some things that you're bringing to the table that don't need to be at the table, you need to self-check regarding that. And I think more importantly, like we have to recognize that we're all here to have a good time. And there are going to be sometimes we're just going to have to let things go. And that happens through having normal adult conversations.
Yeah, and just don't
Yeah,
let
and
it
I think-
fester. Yeah, like just don't let it fester. Like you see it happening, you see the conflict. Oh, they'll get over it. Oh, they'll get over it. Like no, like with the second that you see something where someone shuts down, which is why I also preach about recording, because sometimes you'll miss it. Sometimes a player will say something, and Daniel will be shut down and like totally disengaged, and I'm writing notes on something. I look up, and then Daniel brings himself back. I missed that. I completely missed that moment, and it's our job to manage that table. It's our job to make sure that everyone feels like that's a safe space, and we're there together. Like it's our family. The way that I view it, this is our family. Like we look forward to. I see my players more than I see my family. So like that's the mentality that we have at my tables anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, so I don't want to discount any of the talking to people like adults or any of this. That is all, I think, the most important stuff you can do. But there are also some situations that can be solved by giving your players sort of the agency to solve it. Some of that becomes self-correcting. One of the examples I have is that we had a guy who was metagaming. He had read the module. I was actually running Keep on the Borderlands, the original, and he had read the module back in the day. And so he followed a guy, and he actually tried to assassinate the priest, who it turns out is I don't want spoiler alert, sorry, but who it turns out is a bad guy, right? So he in session 2 was going to go kill this guy for no reason. He followed him down the hallway, was going to murder face him. And the players caught wind of that, but the guy did it poorly. He got arrested and thrown in jail. And there's an effective police force in my game, so the paladin was sat down and told, dude, we're going to release him because you're asking, but he is now your responsibility. If this guy screws up again, you guys are going to pay us 50 gold apiece to get him back out. Do you understand? Right? And then I got to tell you, his behavior improved dramatically because the players were all on him like a hawk. Like, no, don't do that, right? I didn't have to do anything again. That was it. I let them handle it. So.
That's amazing.
All right, we are at 5 o'clock, and so
Yeah.
I know, or sorry, 5 o'clock Central for those of you elsewhere. And I know that we have to kind of wrap. Do we have time, Chris, for everybody to give a quick pitch to their places that they want to
Yeah.
endorse that they're from?
Yeah.
So, all right, so let's go around. And Danny, do you want to start and tell people where they can find your information?
Yeah, so you can. I just posted the link to the trailer on Rem Alternus's website, so you can take a look at that. Really, it's actually, I was really surprised with how good it was. We ran a Kickstarter last year to raise the funds to get that trailer made. It's a promotional trailer. That's the trailer we're going to be used to get it to get the investment and everything in, so that we can actually make an amazing show for everybody. Also, the website is there, Rem Alternus. You can find us, Rem Alternus Productions, on Facebook. You can find Shadowrun Missions, of course, is on Facebook. Shadowrun, of course, and then my own graphic series that I'm working on, illustrated graphic series. If you want to look up Like Clockwork on Facebook, you can find what I'm doing there, and that's it.
Awesome. And Daniel Fox?
So you can find me on social media at Zweihander RPG, just like it sounds. If you know how to speak German, you can spell it. Or you can find our games at zweihander.game. I'll put it here in chat just so y'all can see it. Well, you can't see it. Oh no, can't put URLs in. Yeah, this is zweihander.game. You can find me there, and you'll find all of our cool dark fantasy RPGs we're working on. And otherwise, just follow me on social and stuff, as the kids say. Yeah.
Is that what you could say? All right, I'll take your word for it.
I'm dropping that.
Walter.
Well, I mean, I guess if anyone is in the Kansas City area, we'd love you to come back, come down to Tabletop Game and Hobby and see us. We think we're pretty cool. But if not, please support your friendly local gaming store. If you have one, please go to it. We rely on you guys to do what we do, and I know for myself, I am not emotionally equipped to get a real job ever again. So please, support your friendly local gaming store.
You can also find Tabletop. Tabletop does have a robust online
have
store.
internet,
Tabletop
yeah.
Yes. I just posted that link as
GameandHobby.com.
well. Yeah.
The assist for you there, Walter, with the.
I'm good at technology.
And us here at Fabled42, Tabletop Game and Hobby is our friendly virtual game store, because we are all over the country anyway. So, and they're in the middle, so it makes sense. So Fabled42, we have lots of stuff this weekend. There's a link for our Discord in the Twitch chat. Go ahead and click that. Give us a follow here on Twitch. We have another show that starts in an hour with GW, who plays Jadobi in our normal Wednesday show. It's his first time streaming a game. There's a lot of other pretty awesome tabletop influencers that are part of that game. You might recognize them from other very popular tabletop shows. But yeah, I'm really excited to be on this, to help you guys with this panel, and this Gen Con thing has been a pretty wild ride.
Yeah, this has been awesome. So thank you guys all for tuning in. And if you like what you saw here, and especially if you are KC located or KC adjacent located, we do run these sessions fairly frequently. We're going to start doing even more of them, the GM Zone of Truth. So if you like the chance to ask questions, and I apologize if we didn't get to your question, but yes, we will definitely be running more of these. And we'll promote it through the Fabled 42 channel, so you guys can catch us there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you all, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.